It's unethical for PR people not to use AI.
Really?
Yeah.
It's unethical for them not to use it.
Not to use it. They've got a duty to do their best for clients. And you can't do that if you're not using AI now. You are not doing your best.
Back onto soaking wet wishes do that.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
Well, God.
what's your take on that then, and what can businesses learn from that?
Where do you even start? I think the number one thing businesses can learn from that is actually have decent corporate affairs people.
I mean, I can answer that. Welcome to Embracing Marketing Mistakes, the only show for senior marketing professionals that celebrates the biggest marketing mistakes and fails, helping you learn practical lessons from other people's misfortune. Also, you can double your return on investment and achieve record revenue. This week's show is our anniversary show. It's our first birthday. So thanks, if you've been listening from the very beginning, thank you very much for joining us. And to celebrate our first birthday, we thought we'd bring along our first ever guest, which is Stuart Bruce. He's also my ex-boss, so he gives me quite a lot of abuse. In this episode, Stuart and I and Will go through the various aspects of AI and how it's changed in the last 12 months and how he's integrating it into a lot of organisations in the UK. Stuart also goes into the general election and some of the lessons that you can learn from the communications campaigns that each of the parties is doing, which is quite interesting because there's been some major faux pas. So, as always, sit back, relax, and let's listen to how you can use AI as part of your marketing in 2024 and how you can make the most out of a creative campaign. Hi everybody, welcome back to Embracing Marketing Mistakes. This week we celebrate 1 year of the podcast, and to celebrate that there's no better way than bringing on our first ever guest and my ex-boss, PR powerhouse and futurist, Stuart Bruce.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm looking forward to this.
Have you brought us any presents or anything like that, Stuart, for the anniversary?
A birthday cake?
I was expecting it the other way round. Yeah, I thought I'd turn up here and there'd be a birthday cake in the middle of the table.
Okay, so last time that you were on the show, first of all, Will wasn't here, were you? You were away for some
I think I was on
reason.
holiday, wasn't I?
Yeah, so you didn't do the first interview.
What a level of commitment that is. First ever episode. No, I can't make it.
And so last time we talked about loads of stuff. We covered the AMEC measurement framework, which we use at Prohibition, but we also covered AI. Obviously, loads has happened in that in the last 12 months. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what you've been up to, really. So what has the last 12 months been like for Stuart Bruce and Purposeful Communications? Oh no, Purposeful Relations.
That's it, purposeful relations. I think the big change we've seen is 12 months ago, everybody was talking about AI. The difference now is people are doing AI. Just one quick example. I did a new business call this morning with 2 different PR agencies, so 2 new biz calls before I came here. In the time it took me to drive from home to the office, one of them emailed back to say, yes, they wanted to go ahead with an AI transformation project. So they've got about kind of 60 odd people. And yeah, we're going to kind of go in, we're going to look at what the team does, we're going to look at how they can use AI effectively, put a training program in place. But just the kind of, a year ago, I would have loads of those calls, but nobody was willing to invest the time or the money to actually do it. And I think there's a recognition now that you've got to. Unless you're investing, and if you look at what some of the big global agencies are doing, you've got Publicis investing 300 million euros. You've got kind of mid-size agencies in New York investing millions. And, we're not talking about that. We're talking about kind of, tens of thousands. And it can make a dramatic difference to kind of how agencies or in-house teams operate. And people are now doing it rather than thinking about it or talking about it.
And when you say they're doing it, are we moving beyond just being competent at ChatGPT? Because I think initially people felt they were doing AI, but really they weren't, were they? It wasn't terribly sophisticated.
No, I think there's a lot of confusion in the market as to what AI actually means. Because, there's all sorts of things. Like lots of people had a play, but they had a play with the free version of ChatGPT, which is 3.5. 4 is 10 times better. So if you played with it then and were disappointed, well, duh, that's why, because you were using a useless version.
Yeah.
But it's also more fundamental. Like lots of people say, okay, it's, the focus is on kind of generative AI. It can create images, it can write copy for you. It can't. It can if you're not very good at creating images or you're not very good at writing. But in a PR agency, you've got usually you've got a PR team, you've got loads and loads of passionate writers who are really, really good at it, that can do it quickly, that can do it really high quality. AI ain't going to come close to them. So why on earth would you use AI to do that? There's 101 other things you can use AI for where you'll get benefits. And one of the things we would love to quantify is what that productivity improvement is. Because there's loads of studies out there, that range from between about 10 to 40%, but they're not from the PR sector. So we can't conclusively say this is the productivity saving. But I don't think you'd be able to anyway, because with our work with in-house teams and clients, there's such a disparity between how people work, how they structure their teams. It's going to vary massively anyway. But that saving is not in creating content; it's in other things.
So what's the number one thing that marketing agencies are asking for then? Because you're right, like the content that it spews out is even with a refined. If you create or craft your own custom GPT and spend, I don't know, you can spend between 10 minutes and an hour doing it, and the content can be, I would say, graduate level. But the analysis side of it can be a lot better than that.
Yeah, so I think you've kind of touched on it there. So the type of things that we're looking at are things like compliance checking. If you've got to produce copy that's got to comply with certain regulations, the team can still create it, but then the actual compliance checking can be done by a custom GPT or a custom Copilot. Or things like prepping for a media interview. You can it can be really good at helping you to kind of brainstorm the questions, but also think about responses. But even then, they're quite rudimentary uses. There are some amazing tools like point solutions out there that do specific things. So I had a call with the CEO he's an ex-Google person, of a company the other day where they do AI presentations. So basically, it'll take a video of, like I'm talking here. Yeah. It will kind of give me tips for how it could be better. It will point out kind of, things that I got wrong. But it's also listening to what I say. So it will do the follow-up questions. So you can actually, if say you've done, you couldn't replace a media trainer, but say somebody's been media trained, but then they haven't actually had a media interview for 6 months and they're a bit rusty, you could quite easily use the AI tool to kind of refresh them and upskill them. Or if you're a big global organization, you've got maybe hundreds of media spokespeople, you can't constantly refresh them all. So this is a really good way of kind of doing it.
Right, okay.
And are you seeing any kind of particular sectors that are particularly, interested in or adopting AI more than others?
If you want an exemplar of who is the best in talking specifically about AI for PR and comms, it's government. The Government Communication Service is doing some amazing stuff. They're doing just the way their ambition for what AI should be able to do. There's a really good quote by Simon Bohr, who's the chief executive of GCS, where he basically talks about how, it's a ridiculous notion that PR people, commerce people wouldn't use AI. It's as ridiculous as saying you wouldn't use the internet or you wouldn't use email. But it actually kind of, it goes further than that, because there was a really interesting talk recently by the UK's, not the UK, it's because it's a different legal system, England and Wales' second most senior law chief. And he was actually saying that it is unethical for lawyers not to use AI.
Really?
Yeah.
It's unethical for them not to use it?
Not to use it.
So what, like you would run a legal contract through AI and say, pick me the legal loopholes that you can find?
The use cases might vary, but the reason he was saying it would be unethical not to use it is lawyers have got a duty to do their best for clients and to do it as cost effectively as possible and all those types of things. And you can't do that if you're not using AI now. You are not doing your best. And that got me thinking. So I actually had a look at the CIPR Code of Conduct.
Here we go.
And guess what?
What?
It's unethical for PR people not to be using AI because exactly the same.
Is that our headline for the episode?
Is
it's
in there.
Unethical for PR people not to use AI. So in the legal profession, surely, I mean, this is a bigger conversation, but that's going to have a profound impact on billable hours, isn't it? And profitability for law firms.
It is, because law firms operate in that kind of billable hours model. And this is where you kind of come into, what model should PR agencies be using? And should lots still operate on that kind of billable hours model? which personally I have never been in favour of. There are certain use cases, so things like, if you're doing crisis comms, it's very hard to come up with anything other than billable hours, because to say in advance kind of what you're going to be doing, etc., is just impossible. But this whole kind of concept of charging by value is something that's kind of coming to the fore more. But even then, that's not a simple concept, because it's all very well to say charge by value. So you're helping a client to double its sales. Whoa, we're quids in. That's loads of value. But if your competitor's not charging by value and they're charging by the hour, they're a lot cheaper, and they can only increase it by 50%. It's still more cost effective. The ROI for the client is still better.
So if you're like an in-house marketer, right, and you've got suppliers and you've got contracts maybe with a marketing agency or somebody like that, can you now put in get your PDF of your contract from your agency, put it through one of the relevant bots, one of the artificial intelligence tools, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, whatever you want, whichever one you want to choose, whatever your flavour is. And then can you say, find me a loophole to get me out of this contract? Or can you ask it? Because what is going to be the point of lawyers then? Because that's ultimately what they're there to advise you based on the legal clauses. And if it does that, then what added value are they going to add? Sorry, lawyers out there, if you're listening.
I think it's going to be similar to the added value that we as PR professionals add. That kind of strategic input. And okay, this is what the law says, but actually there are wider implications in terms of your relationship with society or your relationship with the client. So there's still lots and lots of added value that they could offer. And then also you go into, there are different types of lawyers. Often it's not about contracts. It's actually avoiding that dispute in the first place. So it's about relationships. There's something we call dispute resolution. Where you're avoiding going to court. So I think there's lots of scope, but some of the kind of the more mundane things, and it gives the lawyers the talking points that they're going to use in that discussion. It doesn't actually do the talking.
How much, I know traditionally an issue with AI has been kind of hallucination or misinformation or whatever it might, however we want to refer to it. If we are using AI in the context of a highly regulated legal document, for example, or any other application where accuracy is paramount, can we trust it 100%? Because until we can trust it 100%, then it's 100% useless.
Well, this depends on who uses it. So
Okay.
Also, I mean, like to use Chris's prompt, I don't think that would work. I don't know what the right prompt would be, but I'm fairly sure that wouldn't give you what you wanted. And there was actually another lawyer that did. He kind of he's one of the UK's kind of. I did it again. UK's England and Wales's most prominent experts on intellectual property, and he used it to write part of a judgment. And then he gave a kind of speech at a law conference where he found it jolly useful, is what he said. But the point is, the reason he could do that, he asked it a question he knew the answer to. It would have still taken him like half a day to write this judgment, but because he asked it the right question and then could look at it, and because he's an expert and know instant if there was a mistake or not, it was a time saving for him. If you or I tried that,
we wouldn't have a bloody clue.
Yeah, exactly. So we couldn't do it. So you use AI to do stuff you know how to do and to make you better at it or faster at it.
So it's a tool. It's a tool that enhances our experience and our knowledge.
Absolutely.
Essentially.
And I think that's one of the reasons why kind of Microsoft have got it right by calling it Copilot, because that's what it is. It sits next to you, helping you, augmenting what you do, making it better, making it easier, making it faster. It doesn't replace.
Well, I was talking to Andrew Bruce Smith the other day. He's going to come on the pod because we've got him. He's coming to do some. He's coming up, and we've got a pod with him. And I was talking to him, and he said that his view, and I'll get him on the show to ask about it again. But he was saying that Copilot is just a bit. I'm paraphrasing. Shit. He's just like, it's still not. And I've seen you raving about Copilot online, like saying that. Because we were talking about it, we were saying it's price prohibitive at the moment. It's expect you've got to pay for a license per person. I get the idea it's a Copilot and it's going to save you time and money, but is it $20 or $30 per person in your business, and then for the advanced features there's an additional fee, right? Is that right?
Kind of. It's about £25 per person in kind of UK money,
right,
per month, but it's an annual license fee, so you're paying the full year in advance.
Lovely.
And when you consider, Microsoft itself is only about 12 quid, for the suite, you're actually paying twice as much to get Copilot.
Yeah.
So yeah, it looks expensive, but then when you actually break that down, if you've got, and actually work it out, if it's the cost of one person and you've got 10% productivity improvement, you're easily getting ROI from that. So that's kind of one thing. It's the shock is because you're paying in advance. That's what makes it expensive, not the actual kind of monthly fee.
I wonder if they'll drop the price, whether they've put it up so high because for early adopters, like, people like we would use it, but whether it's they're going to let the laggards and the price is going to drop.
I think we've got to kind of wait and see. I think there's a lot of change happening in this market at the moment. But then you kind of mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned kind of advanced features. The advanced features, I think you're probably talking about something called Copilot Studio, which is like $200 a month. And it basically lets you create custom GPTs exactly the same as you can with ChatGPT.
Which does it for free now, by the way. Custom GPTs have been opened on the.
No, that's to use them.
Yeah, you can use them. You can't create them.
Yeah.
If you want to create custom GPTs, you've now got to pay the $20 a month.
Yeah.
So they did
but it's
that.
not $20 a month. Because $20 a month is for the personal version.
Okay.
If you wanted to use
$25 a month.
Yeah, but that's the personal version.
Okay.
If you wanted to use the business version, so using it as a team, that's $10 a month extra.
Okay.
So it's actually price comparable with Copilot if you're using the same ones.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people get confused.
So it's basically, this is the, do you want to use your Samsung phone or do you want to use your Apple phone?
Well, it is kind of, but actually there's something more fundamental. So I would agree with Andrew that kind of performance-wise, sometimes ChatGPT is kind of outperforming Copilot, but you've got to remember they're both based on the same large language model. They're both the OpenAI GPT model.
Yeah.
So there's not that much difference because it's the same model. But the big advantage that Copilot has in terms of ROI and productivity is it's right there in front of you. So it's so tightly integrated that teams use it more. So if you've got to go to another app and remember to go to another app, maybe I can use AI for this.
Yeah.
That's actually quite, for early adopters, yeah, they will. For most people, are they going to remember? Are they going to be bothered? Are they going to want to learn how to use something else? But if you're in kind of PowerPoint and you want to do a summary, create a PowerPoint slide off a Word document, and you just kind of say, create a PowerPoint off this file, boom. And it's right there in front of you. Yeah. Or if you're in Outlook, I went on holiday kind of recently, came back to the usual hundreds of emails. I thought, it's going to be morning's work to plough through these. Asked Copilot to summarise them. It pulled out the dozen that needed action. On one of them, it even said, you might not want to prioritise this one because the deadline was Friday and you've already missed it. It literally.
And does it give you reply? Does it auto generate replies for you as well?
You can
based on your.
You could use it to do that. I'm kind of, for me, that's not necessarily a use case, but that summary. In that particular case, it didn't save me the 3 hours because I looked and I thought, okay, I don't really trust it. So I then
you go back to
that's fine.
But the thing is, after I spent the 3 hours ploughing through them, I thought, oh shit, actually, I didn't need to do that. It was right.
Yeah.
It hasn't missed a single thing.
I suppose it's like auto drive technology in a Tesla, isn't it?
You're still not quite sure.
Yeah, when they roll, people will be using it, but it will take a year or two before people genuinely trust it.
I think it'll be more than a year. See one of my tweets earlier today where I made exactly that point, where I was talking about kind of auto-driving cars. The AI and the technology is there. People, no way are people going to accept it, use it. That cultural change is going to take a lot longer.
I've got a friend who's got a Tesla Model 3 and they've got the auto drive feature and he drives it to Leeds from Harrogate every day and just presses the button and reads whatever he's reading, lets the car drive him, it starts, stops, and it's just, and I'm like, you trust that to do that? And he's like,
well, someone got caught on the M1, didn't they? Sat in the passenger seat, hands behind their head, while the car drove on the M1.
But I was in the car and he pressed it and he said, "What? Watch?" And I was like, okay.
But that actually poses a parallel with AI. So if an auto-driving car hits and
other
kills
brands
someone,
are available.
Who's to blame? And I suppose the same with AI. So, if a legal document, I suppose it's always going to be the human operative, isn't it? The person operating the machinery.
Yeah, but that's why, one of the first steps you need before you start using AI is you need to have that policy in place.
Right.
It's not a kind of one-size-fits-all policy because different organisations need different ones. But unless you've got that in place, then there's no way a team can be confident about doing even quite simple things because they need to know kind of, what the parameters are. This whole one about transparency. What does that actually mean? Everybody says, oh, you should be transparent about using AI. Well, is that transparent about using AI to do grammar checking? Is it transparent about if you do the first draft of something using AI, but then you change 10% of it?
Should we be transparent? We've used Google to help inspire an idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Or gone to the library for inspiration.
Well, that going to the library for inspiration is a really good one because another thing that people talk about is the fact that it's ingested all this copyright content. Okay. So I was in Washington, D.C. last year at the Provoke Global Summit, and the CEO of The Atlantic was there, talking about kind of AI. And the analogy he used is if somebody went to a library and they read every single back issue of The Atlantic and they copied a few pages of it, and then they wrote another article off the back of that because the stuff they'd learned and were inspired by, he'd be ecstatic. That's exactly what he publishes The Atlantic for. He wants people to do that.
Yeah.
Now, he then said, we need to come up with some sort of financial arrangement so as we're getting some sort of recompense for that happening. But in terms of, do I want to stop them? Absolutely not. I want to encourage it. And it's interesting that since then, The Atlantic has actually signed a deal with OpenAI, so they now are getting that kind of financial compensation.
Which they should do, if it's using content. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, there's a lot going on. I mean, not very, very recently, Apple have now done a deal to have OpenAI as part of its platform. I can't help but feel that Apple have just sleptwalked into the AI oblivion because Apple led the way for so many years. The iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. And now, I saw someone talking about the fact that their iPad, that they launched a new one not too long back, and all it was a little bit thinner.
Well, you say that, but Apple isn't an innovative company, so it wasn't the first MP3 player, it wasn't the first smartphone, it wasn't the first tablet.
No.
Yeah, what they're good at is kind of repackaging it. Well, it's not even quality; it's about repackaging it into a format that people want.
Yeah.
Because the iPod came out in 2011, and you're right. There was MP3 players that had the ability to play podcasts before that, but it was only after the iPod came out that the term podcast was coined.
Yeah, exactly.
It showed the influence they have is profound, isn't it?
It is, and it's so I wouldn't write them out of the game at the moment. Other than it's quite interesting that they've partnered with OpenAI. When Microsoft is the biggest investor in OpenAI.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's the bit that
It's bizarre, isn't it? It's like the two worlds have combined there.
So the other big thing, I think, which will be on the minds of our listeners, and I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts about it. Obviously, the last 12 months, lots happening politically. So we've got an Irish election, we've got the UK election in July, US, is it November? Next November 2025. And already in the UK election, we're starting to see kind of social media and marketing activity. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking, okay, what have we seen so far? And often you see real innovation, don't you, from kind of political campaigning. What's your take on this? What can the marketing and comms industry learn from what's happening at the moment in this space?
Well, I think probably the most fascinating thing is if you look back historically at big elections, there's nearly always new things have emerged that PR and marketing can actually draw from and we can use in the kind of corporate or the consumer space. That's not actually happening as much at the moment. We're not seeing that same level of innovation. We are seeing some of the kind of the dangers, so, in the UK, we've had examples of deep fakes being used already. There was one during kind of the local and mayoral elections where there was kind of deep fake audio of Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, I remember
that. There's a Labour Party conference last year. There was a deep fake audio of Keir Starmer. There's been one during this election campaign of Wes Streeting, but not as many as kind of people feared. But also, people get very concerned about kind of deep fakes and kind of, and just for people that haven't come across the term deep fake before, there's kind of two types. One is a deep fake video, where AI is basically being used to make it look like a real person is saying something or doing something they haven't actually done.
The first example of that was the Tom Cruise, or the biggest examples. It was that Tom Cruise guy who's not the real Tom Cruise, which looks amazing.
He was doing magic tricks, wasn't he?
Yeah.
It was the most surreal.
It's very weird. It's really weird.
And then there's been a million Gordon Ramsay ones with him doing pet dog food adverts.
Yeah, no, there's loads of really good ones. But that said, that same technology can be used for good. There's a really good one quite a few years ago now of David Beckham, where he's talking about malaria. And he's doing it in like about a dozen different languages, which he quite clearly doesn't speak, and it's all done by AI, and it's really realistic.
That's clever.
And yeah, for awareness raising, it was amazing. But I think one of the other dangers is we shouldn't let AI blind us from other kind of traditional risks. So there's a video doing the round at the moment of Joe Biden at the G7 summit. And he appears, and the edits that are appearing, they show him kind of wandering off as if he doesn't know what's happening into nowhere. And then I think it's the Italian Prime Minister has to come back and rescue him and pull him back to the other G7 leaders. Except it's an edited video. What he's actually doing is talking. They've just watched a parachute display, and he's talking to one of the display people that had landed, who's squatting on the ground, kind of packing his chute up, which you can't see in the way they've done it.
I've noticed
clever editing.
I've noticed Donald Trump posting an awful lot of content about Joe Biden tripping over, and you're right, it's all very carefully edited and footage out of context.
Yeah, anything to show him as the kind of the doddery old geezer.
That feels like dirty tricks, though. I mean,
no, it is dirty tricks. But
ethically,
the point,
where do we stand on that?
But hasn't America? Yeah, but America. But the election campaigns have always tried to discredit the other person.
Yeah, in the US, it's big budgets, and it is a lot dirtier than you get in the UK. So here, if you're seeing kind of dodgy tricks, most of them are going to be by third parties or individuals rather than actual mainstream political parties who can't really, who quite rightly don't want to do that. I think go back to kind of Will's original question, I think the big learning that I would take so far is if companies haven't done things like updating their crisis comms policies. 10 years ago, we were saying you had to update them for social media. Now you absolutely have to have ways of combating disinformation and misinformation and deep fakes because, you don't need to be huge to be a threat from this.
Because, the implication is your chief exec could appear praising a competitor or being crude on camera or speaking inappropriately. There's no reason why activist investors, for example, might create deep fakes of a chief exec. The threat's real, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And there are actually real examples out there of not just kind of reputational threats like that we've talked about. There was one where there was the UK MD of a power company got a call from the German CEO of the parent company asking him to transfer £250,000 to a Hungarian bank. This was real-time conversation. It had the German accent, and it sounded like the CEO, except he wasn't. He was talking to an AI. It was fraud.
Wow.
That's terrible.
The other thing I've seen, which I'm really keen to get your view on, I've noticed the Labour Party Instagram account has really lent into using memes, which feels actually like they're trivial. In some cases, it feels like the memes are kind of trivialising some of the issues. I'm sure you've seen that. Do you know to kind of explain what they're doing and what your take on it is?
Well, I think there's a couple of interesting things that I've seen Labour doing, and I'm also going to ask you both something in a minute because that's not what the Made Labour digital campaign's about. So
change.
See, you've got the big message.
Yeah. Change.
Yeah.
Not strong and stable anymore. Conservatives are not doing that one, are they?
But the stuff on Instagram and the stuff on TikTok is about understanding the audiences that are on there and actually creating content that's of interest. So for me, I'm not I'm a social media fiend. I absolutely spend I want every single platform going. Insta is the one that kind of leaves me a bit cold. I'm just not a big Insta fan. So this stuff, I've seen it, but kind of because I have to look at it just to see what's happening. TikTok, on the other hand, absolutely love. I'm a huge TikTok. I definitely get lost in there. And what Labour's doing a lot on TikTok as well. But that's not because they see it as there's a huge pool of votes there, What they're actually doing is creating content that the people who are on TikTok might share on a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group. So that's who they're really trying to reach. They're trying to create content that you might share with people.
Because it kind of
Just trying to make noise, basically. By the sounds
some of it's funny, actually. Some of it's quite good, but some of it feels like a middle-aged social media manager trying to be relevant to Gen Z.
But that actually goes into that sharing thing. Yeah, that actually, if you're sharing that with parents, or you're sharing, well, actually, that is what's going to appeal to them.
Yeah, that's an interesting, because actually, the one group in my personal network who still share lame social media memes tends to be
you,
aunties, uncles, and parents. People.
But it's also, I mean, what can kind of corporates learn from the election? There was a really good example last week where the Conservatives had a kind of meme, or they kind of have this poster showing Angela Rayner, and then Keir Starmer was a glove puppet. And in the caption, they kind of said about Angela's pulling his strings. So everybody started sharing it, pointing out how stupid they were, because it was a glove puppet. Duh, that's what they were trying to get you to do. They deliberately made the ad bad and put a mistake in it so as people would share it. You're still sharing the message they wanted to get across.
And that shows a deep understanding of social media, actually, doesn't it? Yeah.
It shows the power of mistakes, everybody, as well.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the research suggests your social media ad will perform better and get more clicks if there's a spelling mistake in the
That's
title.
my excuse, and I've been living off that for years.
I was at the Datacoms conference last week, and one of the examples being shared was Budweiser. And he had that kind of whole thing about kind of using kind of where they got into this
Bud Light.
Yeah. And the whole thing about the trans, and they got loads and loads of flack for it.
Both sides. Yeah.
But what was quite interesting is all of the spikes in people talking about it is when Bud said something. So when they responded, they were, every single time they did it, they were increasing the attention. Yeah. And there could have been an argument where actually they could have responded once and then shut up.
Right, okay. Interesting. That is interesting.
Now, on a kind of we'll move on from politics in a moment. It's an interesting topic.
Well, the reason why it's interesting is because Stuart was involved in the Labour Party's social. You've been involved in the Labour Party for years, and it's here we are now on the cusp of maybe the revitalisation of the Labour Party. Are you involved this year or in any way?
I'm not as actively involved as I've been previously. So if you way back. Back in 2007, I ran what was nearly the world's first political campaign on Twitter.
Is this the fuck up?
It might be.
Here we go. Seamlessly segueing. I love it.
It might be.
Segue media training there.
Oh dear. So, am I going to talk about the fuck up?
Yeah, go on.
Okay.
You've got to. If you've come on the show, you've got to.
Might as well.
Back in 2007, I was the Director of Communications for Alan Johnson, who was standing deputy leader of the Labour Party, and Twitter was brand new. I'd only joined it in kind of December. Actually, no. On the 2nd of January 2007, I can remember when I joined. And by about March, April, I had this idea for how we could use it in a political campaign. We would have been the world's first, using it with a senior figure, but Senator John Edwards in the States then used Twitter to announce his bid to be the Democratic candidate for president, and he beat us by about 2 weeks. We already had the plan, and I was like, we're not going to be the first anymore.
And you could have just done a tweet saying, this is my first tweet 2 weeks before.
Hashtag Ed Balls.
So anyway, so we had this plan to use Twitter, but there were several reasons for it. So the fact is, Twitter was so new, so you weren't actually going to reach your stakeholders, your audience with it. It just, it wasn't a platform you would use for that. So people say, why on earth would you use it then? Well, we used it for kind of two main reasons. One was to actually get attention for the fact we were doing something innovative. And we were pushing the boundaries of campaigning, and we were willing to learn and experiment, and that would become a news story. And it did. We had things like a full page in The Guardian about it. We had like other news stories. So that was one of the objectives. It was to drive media coverage because it was innovative. The second was, and this is the fuck up,
right?
Is at the time, Twitter you could actually get tweets by text message.
Okay.
Yeah, SMS, or send them by text message, SMS. You didn't actually need a smartphone or the Twitter app. So we had to reach about 200,000 or maybe even more, I can't remember the number, Labour Party members. And one of the things we were doing was good old post. We were posting a leaflet out to them. But how do we keep up that communication? Ooh, I know, we can send them free text messages using Twitter. So we included details of how people could subscribe. In the gap between us printing the leaflet and it going to the post and it arriving on people's doormats, Twitter withdrew the service.
And how long was that? What was that?
It was like about a week because
Okay.
So literally when
not long then.
Oh no! When we approved the copy, this was a blooming good idea.
Right.
By the time it lands on people's doormats, it was a bloody bad idea.
Or 200,000 of them.
Yeah, and that was an example. So lesson learned: don't rely on free services for something important.
Yeah.
And did you realise after the mailer had gone out?
Did you get loads of complaints?
I mean, at what point did you realise? Oh shit!
Well, no. It was when the news story came out because it was like literally as it was like the day or maybe a day before that they were due to land on people's doormats. Did we get many complaints? No, because actually this was kind of early
no one could
days.
tweet you.
Yeah, exactly. It was early days, so it was quite hard for them to complain.
Good. That's what we like.
That sounds awful, actually, doesn't it? So you could tweet, but you couldn't actually look at Twitter. You'd
Yeah.
just be,
No, you could because you could get replies by text message.
Oh right, I see.
So they withdrew both sides?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
They literally just turned it off overnight. There wasn't even like a notice period.
So on to there's been a few other back to the kind of the campaigning. There's been a few other fuck ups I can think of, and I think there's some more parallels here with business leaders. So we've obviously seen Rishi Sunak soaking wet. Having an interview. He
Things
left.
can only get wetter. That one.
He then, he's done a number of other things, and inevitably will probably do more things. He left the D-Day commemorations early, didn't he?
Yeah, that was a big fuck up from
So
Rishi.
what's your take on that? And also kind of, is there parallels for chief execs that are putting themselves out there?
I've got a supplementary question to that, because what you mentioned there is interesting, because these are different strategies we're talking about in comms, in political. Ed Davey and the Lib Dems going with our last silly PR, just silly stunts like falling off paddleboards. Typical Boris Johnson on the... What do you call it? What was that?
Because
Zipwire.
they're the challenger brand in effect, aren't they? The
Yeah.
Lib Dems. So have they got to do that stuff?
Yeah.
That's a really long question for you to break down.
No, let's deal with the Lib Dem one first.
Yeah.
Because I think their strategy is really smart. Yeah. Because in this election it was going to be impossible for them to get cut through. The fact that Ed Davey's been doing these things, and most of the time you actually know what his message was. I mean, the paddleboard, what was his message?
I don't know, I didn't see it.
Okay, go on, Will, don't let us down. What
He's going to make it.
What issue was he trying to highlight?
The safety of paddle pods.
The water company issue.
Yeah, the
Ask
sewage.
me that again, and we'll do that.
Yeah.
We'll do that. So start.
No,
with the paddleboard.
I preferred that version. Let's use that
sweating then, wasn't I?
Let's use that version.
At least I could. At least I knew the answer.
Yeah, he did better than you.
The clean water from the sewage industry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got you.
Yeah. And so every time he's done it, there has actually been a hard message behind it, and usually that message has got some cut through. So I think it's incredibly smart.
And he's getting a disproportionate share of voice, really, isn't he, for a party that's never going to win?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, as well, they're targeting specific seats. They could, depending which poll you believe, they could be up to a 50 seats. Yeah, but these are going to tend to be seats where they're taking them. It's kind of straight Tory Lib Dem challenges, and sometimes they're a long way behind. So actually getting that cut through and that attention is really important, and I think they do a really good job of it.
And brands can learn from that, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, also it's not. I think part of it is kind of doing these silly stunts. It's not taking yourself too seriously. Yeah.
It's not. As long as you as long as your sensible political message does get through.
Yeah, as long as there's a purpose behind it, and
exactly.
You're not just doing it for the sake of it. And I think sometimes, I mean, I had this. I can't kind of talk about who it is, but I had this conversation with a client last year, where, God, their brand guidelines look like they've been written by a robot, but a very aggressive robot. And you were like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you must do this. Seriously, who out in the real world cares
Nobody.
Absolutely.
I always think that with brand guidelines.
And
there must be this amount of space around this logo on this background.
There is a shift towards kind of humor in TV advertising, in branding, and you're right. Sometimes people do. Humor is a good way to get cut through, isn't it?
No, it absolutely is. And I think we should see kind of more, even in kind of quite serious spaces. It can be nothing more serious than some of the things the Lib Dems were talking about, yet they could do it effectively. I want to see more kind of brands and corporates embracing that. And not just in the consumer space. This whole cliche about people buy from people. Same applies in corporate and B2B.
So back onto soaking wet Rishi Sunak.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
God.
What's your take on that then, and what can businesses learn from that?
But where do you even start? I think the number one thing businesses can learn from that is actually have decent corporate affairs people.
I mean, for fuck's sake, I can answer that. What idiot thought that doing a shoot outside when it's raining, when they've got an inside, they spent Boris and the team spent all that money on the inside.
Okay, no, actually, bizarrely, I'm going to defend them on that.
Ooh, okay.
Because they couldn't use that inside, that new space, because that's government, and this was a political announcement.
Oh, right,
so you could see when the lectern came out onto Downing Street, because it didn't have the crown, it didn't have the crest on the front. That's how you knew it was going to be the election announcement.
Good knowledge.
Because it was a political thing, and lots of people were flagging that about why didn't they use it. It's because they couldn't.
Were they worried about a Steve McLaren, Wally with the brolly comparison?
Well, but the thing is, there are
he
loads
could have stood
of,
there with a brolly.
Yeah.
And talked it through.
So shortly after it, I shared this picture of Obama showing you can look cool with a brolly in the rain.
Yeah.
And one example is a friend of mine, Keir Dawson. He did a photocal with Ed Miliband where it was in the rain. And it was like a really cool framed shot, and you had kind of Keir standing there in the background holding the brolly over
the bacon sandwich.
Yeah, no, it wasn't the bacon sandwich.
Oh, okay.
Ed Miliband. So you could have done it. Why they didn't? And I think because there's so many of them. Okay, we know there are comms people in the team. Are they any good? We don't know that bit. Are they being listened to? We don't know that bit. I think the big takeaway for corporates is you actually need to take this stuff seriously. It is not minor. This actually is having an impact on the polls. So it's not kind of frippery on the side. Actually, the way that you do these things really does matter. So not only do you need really good people in the team, you actually have to listen to the advice that they're giving you.
And it's understanding what now in this online world can start trending and can start being shared.
But also the bloody visual, the actual visual of you getting piss wet through, stood outside number 10 Downing Street. What plonker said that was a good idea? Like, you stood outside, like Stuart and I, when we worked together, would have gone, Rishi, mate, you're going to look like a wet fish stood outside getting wet, talking about, because that's all you could hear was, and he was just getting wetter and wet. And I was looking at him, and I stopped listening to what he was saying and thought, he looks like he's getting drenched. Is no one going to give him an umbrella?
Yeah,
it was ridiculous.
But the thing that's so astounding is they're such, often these mistakes are quite hard to spot. So there was another one that went round where he was standing in front of a kind of display on the wall, and that looked like he had Mickey Mouse ears. Now, that, to be fair, you probably have to be a comms person or somebody that's used to doing photocalls to spot that one.
Yeah,
but the brolly in the rain, you didn't need any expertise whatsoever to work that out.
And I do feel a little bit sorry for Rishi, because there's another one as well that he dropped a day later, which was he was in Wales, and he turned around to some Welsh people and went, "Are you looking forward to the Euros?" And they were like, Rishi, that they're not in the Euros?
Yeah. But I think there's two different issues here. So some of them are mistakes by, the things, why on earth isn't there a team sorting these things out? I think things like the thing about the kind of the Sky TV dish and the Wales in the Euros is more to do with him. Yeah, actually.
Not being prepared enough.
No, it's not about him not being, this is him. He doesn't relate to kind of the challenges that normal people have.
He's not got the common touch, has he? And the Sky TV comment.
What, the multi-billionaire Rishi Sunak hasn't got the common touch?
The appropriate way to field that would have been to admit he's fortunate enough to be from a privileged background, but he empathises and he knows people who did struggle when, did and do struggle. Instead of kind of scoffing and laughing and fudging it, he's a poor communicator, essentially, is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And I just want to kind of go back, because you also mentioned D-Day. And
Oh yeah, the commemorations.
yeah, I mean,
18.
leaving that early is it is not even in the same category as the others. And I have knocked on doors since then, for the Labour Party. And you don't need to say, people will bring it up organically. They will talk
Because they're angry about it.
They are angry about it. They are upset about it.
Yeah, I thought it's a massive own goal, that.
Yeah. And for me, it kind of resonates slightly differently because, lots of people can talk about grandparents or whatever that were at D-Day. So my granddad was in Burma. So kind of D-Day, he was kind of, fighting the Japanese in the Burmese jungle. So D-Day doesn't kind of resonate with me in the same way. But it does resonate with a lot of people. And then just things like, Rishi Sunak's constituency is Richmond. And if you ever kind of driven up the A1, you'll see as you're driving north, you've got Catterick Army Base on your right. It's the UK's biggest army base in his constituency. Yeah.
I mean, the political thing. It's interesting how it's all panning out. It's Labour's to lose, really, isn't it? And then the only thing that is happening now is our good friend Mr. Farage is making a return, and apparently just yesterday they overtook the Conservatives, and they're saying now if you've got a vote, put it towards reform. And whatever you think of him, whatever you think of Nigel Farage, and I've got my own opinions on him, but whatever you think of him, he is a good communicator. He seems to tap into something. He's Marmite, isn't he?
Yeah.
And is that because he's another challenger brand? He can
He's another Boris.
He can do anything and say anything in the way that perhaps the mainstream parties can't.
I can just say yes. you could have answered the question for me there, Will. It's the fact that... So two things is, one, he's relatable. Yeah, so love him or loathe him, he doesn't look like the kind of stereotypical politician. But there's also the thing that actually the Lib Dems share. They know they're not going to be in power. They can say or do whatever they want. Yeah, they're never, ever going to need to kind of fulfill or kind of live up to it. And it gives them a lot more leeway. And, if you looked at kind of Labour's manifesto launch, it was okay, but that's actually what it needed to be.
Yeah.
You weren't meant to get any stellar, exciting moments out of it. You just needed to look at Keir Starmer and the shadow cabinet team and say, yeah, I can imagine them in government.
I don't think you have to imagine much longer, to be honest.
Fascinating insight. And
how have we got to politics?
Well, I just think the parallels, the parallels that business can learn from that, and those own goals, and in retrospect, a lot of it seems so obvious, but you absolutely need to cover this stuff off and identify risk points and risk factors. I mean, it just shows a massive lack of awareness, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You've attended a lot of summits recently, and you've attended the AMEC summit. So what's changed from last year to this year?
Okay, so I was at the AMEC summit in Sofia, and I think kind of there were lots of every time I go, the thing about AMEC is I don't learn a great deal because there's such a strong community that a lot of people, if they've got interesting things to say, they've already shared them in blog posts or articles or podcasts or something. So I don't necessarily learn a lot. But what you do get by going and talking to like-minded people and listening to the speakers is, I think we all have an imposter syndrome, and you think, is this advice I'm giving clients really the best advice? And you kind of go there and you listen to people, and it inspires you to kind of come back. And sometimes you're trying to convince clients to do things that are really difficult, and they don't necessarily want to do it. And I always come back inspired of being able to kind of push them and persuade them that actually what I am saying is the right thing to do, and and thinking of new ways to get them to listen. So that's kind of one thing. But a kind of couple of other themes that emerged is, one was this whole kind of thing about the difference between kind of reputation and brand, or kind of reputation and relationships and performance marketing, and just an acknowledgement of how important reputation and relationships are. And it's all very well kind of looking at things like last click and attribution and blah, 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 which, you can do, but that is never, ever going to be enough. You're always going to need that kind of foundation to build from. And I think we're doing a lot more now about thinking, okay, so how do we use data and analytics for that foundation? How do we use it to understand who our stakeholders are? how do we use it to inform behaviour? And I think kind of one of the key things for me is put yourself into kind of client perspective, and you're the CEO or you're the chief finance officer. Which you're going to be willing to pay most for? Somebody that can say, okay, this is what we did for you, and this is how much money it's made. So you're kind of giving them some historic information. Or when you're using data and analytics to provide insight and say, if you do this, this is the opportunity you've got. This is what you could make. That is far more valuable in the C-suite than this historic reporting that we're too often focused on.
And is there, is there a kind of an incremental movement towards measurement? Is the AMEC framework, are these kind of annual summits, are they actually driving better practice? Are we actually getting anywhere?
Yeah, we are. I think it is a slow process, but we are getting there. And I think the reason it's a slow process was actually encapsulated by one of the presentations, which was Professor Jim McNamara, who's kind of leading light academic in kind of comms measurement. And he ran a session that was an hour long where he claimed we were all going to earn a third of a PhD in an hour. Quite an amusing concept. Okay. I don't think we did, but it was a brilliant session. And one of the things that he kind of covered in that, and Tim Bailey, my business partner, kind of turned to me and said, this is what we do. And it's exactly what we do with clients, but we don't explain it in the same way as Jim did. He explained it far more clearly and in a much better way than we've been doing. And basically, he talked about something called the theory of change. And that's about if you're measuring, and you guys do this because you're using some of this here at Prohibition. Is you don't start by measurement at the end and thinking about kind of how you're going to show your success. You start by thinking, okay, what result do we want to achieve? Yeah. Is it sales? Is it recruitment? Is it staff retention? You start with the result. Yeah. And that's what Jim's kind of 1 hour was all about. It was about how getting you to think about, okay, if that's the result we want. What are the changes? What do we need to put in place to get that change, to get to that result?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think we've obviously worked with you to develop our own AMEC proposition at Prohibition. I think we have found it such a fantastically useful planning tool, and often being so clear on what result we want to get, etc. We can actually build in those measurement elements at the start of the campaign, because there's nothing worse than getting to the end of the campaign and thinking, shit, how are we going to measure this? We haven't even got the capabilities to do that. So as a planning tool, and we started rolling it out amongst our clients, and probably a third of our clients now use it. And I don't know what my question. It's a rambling question. That
But so you didn't have the result in mind when you started.
That's exactly right. I should have used AMEC for that question.
But no, just seriously, I mean, not want to kind of blow your guys' trumpets for you, but actually the fact that you're taking this approach with clients gives you a real competitive edge. Because I'm just constantly astounded when we kind of see some people out there and you think, seriously, that's kind of your approach to kind of working with clients, and you think that's going to add value for them and that's going to give them something that's worth paying big bucks for. You're actually walking the talk and doing it.
Yeah. We always ask somebody when they come on this show, as you know, you've been on it before, if you were us, who's the next person you'd invite on this show and why?
Actually, I'm going to say Jim McNamara. Yeah,
For a deep dive into AMEC.
Yeah, Jim's a really good guy. He's based in Sydney, so you'll have to shuffle your time zones around a bit.
Jim, and which business does he work for?
He's a professor. Oh, I've got to get the name of his university right. He'll be upset. It's the University of Technology in Sydney.
So fascinating chat, Stuart. Thank you very much for that. And we look forward to having you on in another 12 months when we can look back at the election and we can look at how advanced we all are with AI.
Brilliant. Look forward to it.
I'll have just replaced him with AI by then.